And hello, Mets fans. The trade deadline is over, and to say that the Mets had a shakeup would be quite the understatement. Now, I was thinking about coming on yesterday after Verlander, but I kind of wanted to see what the reaction of the fan base and see the reaction of the media to all the Mets moves, highlighted, of course, by the dismantling of the rotation by trading Justin Verlander and also of Max Scherzer. Max Scherzer made some interesting comments, which we'll get into. But I know what you want. You want my reaction to this trade deadline, which has been very polarizing. And for the most part, I disagree with a lot of the people out of New York today. All I heard on the radio and through the New York media was that the Mets made a mistake, that the Mets are idiots, same old Mets. The Mets and Steve Cohen should be embarrassed. They're punting on 2024. And I kind of am sitting there going, so the Mets made a decision at the trade deadline. The New York Yankees didn't do anything at the deadline and didn't get criticized. But going back to the Mets, I looked at this trade deadline as a huge moment in Steve Cohen's tenure and for me, a good sign that he is the right owner for the New York Mets. Now, I've been seeing all day, I can't believe Cohen would sell off. I can't believe the comments that were made by Billy Epler. I can't believe the Mets are punting on 2024. The Mets are not punting on 2024. If you read the comments, they're expecting a lot of this great young core that they have brought back to be up in 2025. I do think that the Mets are having a fundamental pivot. And for those of you joining us, comment below. Would love to hear your thoughts on the live stream. You can check out our community page here on Rich Sports Talk. I have a grade up, and for the most part, a lot of you were A, B, over 50% A's and B's for the trade deadline. I asked you your grades, a couple D's and F's, of course. So we got the spectrum, but my big thought process on the whole Mets situation was Cohen made a decision. And when you're the owner of a franchise in your front office, you have to make difficult decisions. I would rather have a front office that makes the tough decisions and is willing to pivot than a front office that is trying to make something that is fundamentally not working work. The New York Mets were broken. The New York Mets were not a team that could win a World Series this year, and moreover next year. But I still heard the criticisms all day long. Well, what about 2024? What about 2024? I still believe the Mets are going to field a good team in 2024. After all, I think they have a very good solid core and they're going to get pitching. But I don't think the Mets are going to make the mistake again of paying guys at the end of their career over $40 million a year. And for the same Met fans that were complaining, and I heard kicking and moaning about this trade and trading Verlander and trading Scherzer, what would those Met fans have been like next year when you had both of these pitchers coming back? A year older, more wear and tear. We've seen Scherzer hit a wall. We've seen him decline. Verlander was great the last month, but we're forgetting he missed the first month and a half of the season and struggled his first month and a half coming back from injury. The Mets are paying these guys to be at the very least 1A type starters in a rotation. Verlander's pitched like one the last month, but for the majority of the season, he's looked more like a good number 2, and Scherzer's looked more like a number 4 or 5. And the Mets were able to unload those contracts. Yes, they will have to bite the bullet on a lot of the money, but if you look at it the way I do, the Mets also are saving $20-something million by not paying Scherzer next year, and they're saving another $20-something million with Verlander in the long haul. Yes, the Mets will be paying them, but they're also freeing up cap space to add other key pieces to this team. And let me get to Max Scherzer for a minute, because Max Scherzer, I think, will go down as one of the most disappointing Mets signings, but probably one of the most despised signings in terms of how he's handled New York City. Because Max is a great competitor. I think Max is a great locker room guy. But this notion that he had at that press conference with the Texas Rangers, I think has been taken so out of context. And for those of you who haven't heard, basically, Max Scherzer's playing the card of, I wanted to be here and compete. I went to Billy Epler and he said, we are rebuilding in 2024. Then I went to Steve Cohen and he said the same thing. And that is why I traded my no trade clause. Max, I hate to tell you this, you haven't pitched like an ace. The Mets are paying you $43 million. And in the biggest moments last year, when you had a chance in Atlanta to earn that paycheck, you crapped the bed. When you had an opportunity in the postseason against the San Diego Padres to show you were Mad Max, you imploded at Citi Field. This year, when Justin Verlander was on the shelf to start the season, you were going to be the stalwart ace of this rotation. Meanwhile, Kodai Senga blew past you as the team's most reliable pitcher. And yes, you've had a couple of great starts. But how many starts did Max Scherzer only get through 3 or 4 innings? He's given up more home runs through a season this year than he has at any other point in his career, and his ERA is over 4. Here's something that people I don't think are talking much about, and let me just put this out there. And again, I don't know this as fact, but I like to read in between the lines a little bit. Max was easy to throw Billy Epler, and look, I'll be the first to say, guys, if you've watched this channel, you know I am not a big fan of Billy Epler. And I don't think Billy Epler will be the long-term shot caller here, and I will get to that in a minute. But I looked at the way the Mets were talking about 2024. I think that they're viewing 2025, 2026 as their peak when all of these prospects that they brought in are mature at that point. And I do think the Mets had a general plan that had to be tweaked. And I will get to that in a second. But can we be honest here? Billy Epler was probably telling Max that because guess what? Billy Epler, Steve Cohen, and the Mets don't want Max Scherzer back. They don't want him to opt in because if you were going to say, yeah, Max, we're going to be fully in next year, you know what Max would do? Okay, then I'm going to take my $43 million option. Do you really think Steve Cohen and the Mets really wanted that? I mean, they didn't necessarily lie to Scherzer, but did they kind of persuade him to say, you know, Max, Texas really wants you, and, you know, they'll pay you next year. And, you know, we're probably not going to be as good. We're probably not going to be as all in next year. Like, am I the only one that read that and is looking at the situation from that way where the Mets don't want Scherzer back? They don't want to pay him $43 million. Think about it. They want to pay him $22 million to not be on their rotation next year because of how bad he was. And the other thing with Scherzer, too, that I do think Met fans forget is Scherzer didn't exactly, you know, kick down the door and want to be here. I mean, if you remember that offseason, the number kept going up and up and up until basically Scherzer got a record contract that blew every other starting pitcher out of the water. Yeah, Max, if you were really that concerned about winning and you were really that excited and believed in the Mets that much, why did you take them for every red cent that you could? And look, I'm not knocking a baseball player for taking that money and making that money. But, you know, Max, I would think you could be a little bit nicer to, I don't know, the ownership group that paid you the most handsome contract for a pitcher in Major League history. And basically, all you did, your Met career will be remembered by injuries and coming up short in the biggest spots. Yeah, your first year, you had your moments, you were solid, but you were never that ace that the Mets were paying you to be. So for everyone saying, oh my God, Billy Epler spilt the tea, the Mets are not going to be competitive all 2024. You don't think Billy Epler was kind of trying to persuade Max to, I don't know, get rid of that no trade clause so they could trade him? And the same thing with Justin Verlander. I like Justin Verlander a lot, but we're already starting to see some of the signs. He's still a great pitcher and can still bring it, but he missed the first month and a half of the season. And the Mets made the right decision where they banked on these two being the guys to carry this team. The Mets, we've said it all offseason, were only going to go as far as Verlander and Scherzer would take them. And the Mets have made the painful mistake of realizing that's not going to work. And for everyone killing the Mets for trading off and selling and reloading the prospects, I think it was brilliant to do that and build up a system. But more importantly, I do believe that the Mets have a plan going forward. But more importantly, I do think they've made alterations to the original plan. If I were to guess, this is how Steve Cohen looked at when he bought the Mets and how he wanted to build this team. Because he's said it on numerous occasions. He wants this organization to be the Dodgers of the East. And what is that? It's spending big money, but also having a great system and bringing up young players and having young pieces to make said moves to go and acquire the final pieces to a championship puzzle. Steve Cohen, when he took over, can we just remember that, oh, by the way, the Mets were run by a former agent who brought in a lot of his former clients, including Robinson Cano and an albatross of a contract. The Mets did not have a great system when Steve Cohen took over. They did not have the analytics department. They didn't have a pitching lab until this year. They didn't have the resources. And now this team, we see the huge payroll, but no one ever talks about the investments that this organization has made in the minor leagues, in the scouting, and the development of young players. With that all being said, I believe that Steve Cohen looked at the Mets as a 4 to 5 year plan or a 3 to 4 year plan where if I spend a lot of money in the short term, I can put a team on the field that could win a World Series, but more importantly, a team that can buy me time, a team that can buy me time where I can develop younger players, where I can reload a farm system, because it takes a good 3 to 4 years to build a great farm system. And for me, I think that was the plan. Steve Cohen was going to spend, have these free agents, have these short contracts. And again, were the numbers astronomical? Yes. But you know what? The great thing is the Mets weren't locked into 4 or 5 year bad contracts. They were locked into high deals. But when you really think about it, Scherzer completely comes off the books next year. And the following year, Verlander will as well. But the problem is the plan got interrupted at the halfway point. And mostly it's because the game of baseball, which no one could have predicted, drastically changed. Because the New York Mets were built last year to compete in baseball before 2023. They were built as an older team, maybe not the most athletic team, but a team that could work counts, a team that could draw walks, a team that could get on base, and a team that when they got guys on base could slug it over the fence and be able to hold teams to under 3 runs with a starting rotation and a bullpen. What has happened in Major League Baseball? We have seen the rule changes. And wouldn't you know, baseball is completely different this year. Have you noticed the teams that are doing well? The Baltimore Orioles, the Cincinnati Reds. What teams are not doing well? The New York Mets, the New York Yankees, the San Diego Padres, the LA Dodgers. What do those teams have in common? They were built for the old game of baseball. The younger and smaller team market teams are built around athleticism, putting the ball in play, and on a system that rewards athleticism. Did you notice who the Mets brought in? The prospects they traded for. A lot of high on base guys, guys that put the ball in play, guys that have high averages, guys that are athletic, guys that can steal bases. I mean, Acuna has 42 steals in the minor leagues this year. The Mets, unfortunately, were bombarded by rule changes that have fundamentally changed baseball. And the faster pace of the game, one thing I don't think people talk about is I think it impacts older teams more because guys don't have that recovery time within a game. The guys are having to go at a faster pace, and you're seeing guys like Verlander and Scherzer with the pace much faster are seemingly wearing down faster in games. You look at teams that have older rosters, more injuries, more nights where you have to take the stars out because of the pace. The pace has changed to reward young and athletic teams and hurt teams that are veteran and were built with the old system. And you look at this Met team, not overly athletic, not a lot of athleticism in the lineup, a lot of swing and miss guys, guys that can get on base, but can't really do much when they get on base. This is a team that is not built to win right now. And I give the Mets a lot of credit. They realize they have a problem and they chose a plan. And I will support an organization that at least has a plan and also has the gumption to make plans and pivot. The worst thing you can be in sports is stagnant and just expecting things to change. The worst thing for the Mets, and I think deep down, all Mets fans know this, and baseball fans would agree with this. If this team were to quote unquote run it back again next year, and yes, Edwin Diaz would be back, but the problem is you'd have Marte back, who's had injury issues, is getting older, has been banged up this whole season. You would have another year under the belts of Verlander and Scherzer. Could they perform up to their peak? Could they make 25 starts in a year? The jury's out on that. And would it be worth it to bring back those guys at those salaries? This allows the Mets to be competitive. And when the Mets say that they're not going to spend money, I think it's going to be they're not going to go over the top and potentially sign Correa before that thing blew up. They're not going to drop $43 million on a 40-year-old pitcher. I do think they'll spend money. They'll have to add to this rotation. I'll be curious to see how they do that. But for people expecting them to just go out and buy and spend $500 million in payroll, that's not going to happen. Now, one of the things I've heard about this is how does this affect Ohtani? I think that the Mets are getting strong indications that Ohtani really wants to be on the West Coast. And I do think the Mets are going to be in on that sweepstakes. I do think they'll give him the biggest contract offer. I just have a feeling that Ohtani and the Mets might not mesh in terms of ideals. And the other thing, too, is I think a lot of people are worried in baseball where Ohtani has been unbelievable for 3 or 4 years. The question is, when does that start to go down the cliff? And you're basically paying a guy to be a top 10 pitcher and a top 10 hitter. But in 2 or 3 years, can he pitch that much? Will he have to be relegated to a reliever? Will his offensive production slip? And then all of a sudden you're caught paying not only a guy a huge max contract, but someone to play 2 positions, and he might not be able to do that because of the wear and tear. So I do think there's a part of the Mets that would look at Ohtani, but I also think at this point it's still a bit of a long shot. It's not because the Mets are giving up next year. I still think that they look at this team as a team that has a future. The other issue that the Mets are looking at is you have to be aware of your competition. Who is their main competition? Who is the biggest competition in baseball right now? It's the Atlanta Braves. The Atlanta Braves are loaded not only with talent, but with loads of young talent. I think the Mets are looking at and going, we're not going to be able to compete with that in the short term. We have to build to deal with that in the long term. And look, I think that the Mets will not be a World Series favorite next year, but do I think they can easily be a playoff team with some of the right moves? Absolutely. If one or two of these prospects becomes a decent player and contributes next year, this is still a good core where you have Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, Brandon Nimmo, Francisco Alvarez. The Mets now have given themselves lottery tickets, and if one of them hits, it'll be great. And look, I get there's a lot of frustration. It's embarrassing how this season has gone. But the Mets have also realized that just spending is not going to win a championship. They have to be smart and adapt. And one thing I think is really interesting is in the short term, I do think a lot of Met fans are going to be upset in the rest of the season. I know it's a lost season, will be frustrating to watch. But at the same time, they made a choice. They made a decision and they are fully committing to a plan. They are not a team like the Padres or the Yankees right now who are sitting there at the trade deadline, vastly underachieving. And instead of trying to build for the future or just say, you know what, we got to go in all in this year, both those teams didn't really do anything. And they don't really, how's their future? How's their present? The Mets at least have a plan and made decisive action. And look, Steve Cohen, I can tell you, he's not happy with the success on the field. And look, Steve Cohen is a brilliant businessman. He understands optics. He knows he's not going to look great in the eyes of the fan base for doing this. This is going to bring a lot of heat. The easy decision would have been do nothing, don't annoy people, but don't make the product better in the long term. You know that old expression, sometimes to make an omelet, you have to break a few eggs. Well, the Mets, in order to build this team the right way and get back on track, needed to break a few eggs. And unfortunately, that was Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer. But I do think there's also a bigger picture. But before we get to that, let's check out some of your comments. J Dubs, the Mets realized what wasn't working for them. And look, it wasn't working. As Met fans, we've been saying this since April. It's not working. It's not working. Let me ask Met fans this who are pissed off. What about this team who has frustrated you this entire season makes you feel they're going to be better next year? Yeah, Diaz will be back, but that doesn't make this lineup more athletic. That doesn't make a lot of these key players younger. Like, how are the Mets going to be significantly better next year? I don't see it if they were to stay in their current construction. Verlander would be an upgrade at the top of the rotation, but here's the other thing. He pitches well next year, opts in like Scherzer did. Do you really want him, if he starts falling off the cliff, to be that committed? The Mets realized that they made a mistake. And instead of just letting their investments wilt off the vine, they said, look, we're going to take these bad investments and turning it into the best that we can. And they ended up getting two top position player prospects. And a lot of people, I saw the argument, well, the Mets didn't get pitching. The Mets could have gotten a better deal from the Dodgers and gotten more pitching. You don't know what the best deal out there was. And the fact that Verlander had the no trade clause, where did he end up going? It's to Houston. I don't think Verlander really wanted to leave New York. I think Verlander wanted to stay. But then can you send him? Houston's an easy sell. You're going to be competing again. You're going back to a team that loves you. You're going back to a place that's comforting. It's where you've been, and you can finish out your career with the Astros. That, to me, was too easy of a sell for Verlander and was one of the reasons why he waived his no trade clause. But the other thing, too, which we have to keep in mind is, what did Steve Cohen say a couple weeks ago when he addressed the media? He wanted to hire a president of baseball, and we all know that he is coveting Stearns. What is more attractive to a baseball president? I think that this makes the Mets actually look more attractive to people around the league. Why? They're now all of a sudden burdened by the Verlander and Scherzer spots on the team and the contracts. Sure, the contracts will still have a bit on the payroll, but the Mets were able to save some money by dealing them. The Mets now also have a farm system that is stacked with prospects. They have 5 in the top 100, and my guess is by the end of the season, probably will have 6 or 7 players in the top 100. And because of that, it not only gives you a good core for the future, but the other thing prospects bring you is trade opportunity. I do think that the Mets have told us one thing very loudly and clearly is as much as Met fans have been clamoring for Vientos and clamoring for Mauricio, I think internally this organization doesn't have the same viewpoint as the fans because they made sure to get a great outfield prospect. They made sure to go and get a great middle infield prospect. And you look at the positions that they focused on, a lot of middle infield. I understand Lindor's there, but I'm kind of wondering, is Mauricio the Mets' golden ticket this offseason? Are they building up his stock and they don't want to bring up to the MLB to keep his stock at a high in AAA that they can use him as a piece in a trade to get a pitcher? Could they get a pitcher under control and a young pitcher to bolster this rotation? And Mauricio is the key piece in the deal this offseason. There's a bunch of ways that this can go about. And for Stearns, it gives him more flexibility as prospects to either bring up or trade. He doesn't have 2 aging veterans at the top of rotation that are stuck on the roster next year. All of a sudden, the Mets are more of a clean slate. And for someone that's looking to construct a baseball team and be the team president, that looks like a more appealing job. So I think the Mets did the right thing. 2023 is lost, but sometimes in order to take 2 steps forward, you have to take a step back. I think the Mets did that. And I do think that this decision is the right decision in the long term. But if you're just joining us, make sure to give us a like, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our content here on Rich Sports Talk. We'll see you next time.